just remember the first note, the first sound. It was so rich and right, totally perfect, and so like apocalyptic.
Ghost rider, motorcycle hero. Baby, he's looking so cute. Sneaking round in a blue jumpsuit. Ghost rider, motorcycle hero. Baby, he's blazing away. Like the stars in the universe.
New York was the greatest city and the greatest challenge and the greatest struggle going against the odds. We didn't see a lot of other options for us except doing what we did.
When I say I'm in love, you best believe I'm in love, L-U-V.
The whole thing about that period, it was a party. Everybody would dress to the nines in the style of the day. Tremendously high heels, kerchiefs, polka dots, colors, and then the guys were all in high heels too, because everybody was all unisex, you know. And it was a very up-pop thing. They were basically escaping the reality, which at the time was the Vietnam War. And that's why I think glam rock had a lot of relevance at that time, because it was a period of escapism. And here we come out with no guitars, no drums, no bass, two guys, regular heels, you know, right down to the floor, with the name Suicide. We were really street guys. We were very close to living on the street, and many times did. But we couldn't even afford to dress up, to even fool ourselves to think we could escape that long, and to dress up that well, and to party that much. We weren't, it was like an elite. To us, it was like an elite. Our nature wasn't to escape. It was to bring the sheer absurdity and injustice and horror, really, of what we felt reality was. Punk was really not about escaping anymore. It was about carving out a place for ourselves in this in this old order.
Fast money music. It's fast money music. It's fast money music. It's a deal they say. They slap you on the hand. They say give it to me. They say I got the money. Yeah, you got the fame. Fast money music. It's fast money music. Yeah.
Starting around 71 or so, when we started, we had a punk mass we put out, and Punk Music by Suicide, we said, and a few others. What it was we just called ourselves punk. We were looking for something to describe, you know, ourselves for the gigs. Lester Bangs had used the word to describe Iggy in Cream magazine. Alan had read the article, told me about it, and he said, yeah, let's call ourselves Punk Music. And it was quite early. We didn't expect it to become a scene called punk music. Of course, we're nowhere part of that scene. We were part of something that was going to come later.
And I am Lydia Lunch. And I'll never be on this again. Because what I'm telling you about is reality, and beauty, and truth, and filth, the real thing. And what you want is boring, and stupid, and senseless, and trivial. You've got it.
Lydia came from Rochester, I believe. And I think she kind of ran away from home. I think she had some trouble at home. Apparently was a groupie when she first came to town, and was kind of keen on Mink DeVille and the Dead Boys.
Why are you here tonight? To see the Dead Boys. Why? Because they're great fucks.
I wasn't there, but I've heard that she used to bring them lunch to their rehearsal space, henceforth known as
Lydia Lunch.
To escape the nightmare of upstate New York. Well, I was penniless, and I wouldn't say I begged on the street, but I'd invent scams where I'd take a manila notebook and claim I was working for the Cancer Foundation. Do you know children are born with cancer? And I would solicit my $5 or $10 a day, which is all it took to live in New York at that point. Some hippies took me in Chelsea, right by the Chelsea Hotel, and Max's Kansas City being not far away. I'd go hang out there and befriended suicide. And usually there'd be 5 people in the audience and me with Ellen Vega beating his face in with a microphone. I thought that was definitely the place for me.
She had a bit of a reputation for deflowering young gentlemen. And as I was a virgin, I think she considered me a suitable target for the application of such skills. And it was part of my audition, I think, in a way. She cornered me in the men's bathroom at the Artist's Base show, and expressed her desire to relieve me of my virginity. She was pretty gentle with me, considering her notorious reputation. But immediately afterwards, she started telling me how she was interested in brain surgery, how it was a hobby of hers, and wanted to know if I would be one of her patients. And, you know, it helped secure my position in Teenage Jesus as bass player, I feel.
We are great, aren't we?
Well, I mean, I came here to do theater, and I was in the process of actually setting up a whole theater situation with a friend of mine named Jeff Long. He had a loft in Soho. We were painting the place black, and at one point I just couldn't help myself, and I decided I just wanted to start a fucking band. It got to the point where basically we kind of decided, okay, we can, you know, we're on a stage in front of an audience, we can basically use this band as our theater group, so to speak. So that was Theoretical Girls. As it turned out, when I started the band, it turned out there were all of these other bands in New York at the same time, you know, and that ended up becoming the no wave scene. I mean, this whole thing kind of exploded out of nowhere, and when we all found out that the rest of us existed, I mean, it was incredibly exciting. And I mean, the moment when this all really came together was something called the No Magazine benefit.
And they invited all these kind of Soho-based bands like the Theoretical Girls, which was Glenn Branca's band.
Red Transistor.
The Contortions.
The Gynecologists.
Mars.
Teenage Jesus.
And DNA.
What DNA was doing was the most difficult thing of anybody, you know. And in fact, if there's any band that truly, you know, represents that no-wave sound, it's definitely DNA.
At least in our case, DNA we set out to be as different as we could from anybody else, you know. So I thought, let's make this as stop and start, spare, you know, get as much silence in there as we can. I mean, I deliberately made it as different from them, you know. And also, I figured, you know, the wilder, the newer sounding, the quicker we become huge stars.
Get out of here! Go fuck yourself!
Eno was there, you know, signing up the East Village bands and putting them on this No New York record.
Eno had envisioned just like doing all the bands that played at that festival, and instead he ended up doing only 4 of them, and those 4 were DNA, Teenage Jesus, Mars, and the Contortions.
Bands than what was represented on No New York that fit into the category of no wave. But the beauty of no wave was that no band sounded like any other band.
I think we were trying to like do some kind of caveman kind of approach to art.
Something happened, and it was magic. You know, I mean, we didn't have a reputation for nothing. We actually had something.
The intent behind Teenage Jesus was to disregard the influences that caused me to want to create in the first place. So with Teenage Jesus, even though maybe television and Richard Hell and Patti Smith and Suicide and the New York Dolls had created interest for me to do music, I needed to do something far more radical than even that.
I mean, even the punk bands were still doing pretty much blues-derived songs. I mean, the idea of just forgetting about this blues-derived thing.
I thought about sort of rearranging the basic building blocks of music, you know what I'm saying, and a kind of a live band experience, you know what I mean. Even though I didn't know how to play chords and didn't really have much of a notion of song structure and stuff.
I never thought of myself as a musician.
I never considered myself a musician.
It was about making music that referenced nothing else, that reminded you of nothing else.
We didn't wear costumes. You know, we didn't have a light show. We in fact, did everything not to put on a show.
Our shows were never more than like 10 or 11 minutes long. I think once we played for 13 minutes.
We rehearsed like crazy, you know what I mean? We just kind of, it was very homemade, you know, it was very labor intensive.
Short, brief, aggressive outbursts of anti-music.
It was always in effect to divide the audience. I never wanted to bring the audience into what I did. I always thought that using music as this kind of weapon was to, it's not about separating the weak from the strong, it's about separating the insane from the sane. It's about separating the truly desperate from those that are looking for entertainment. I never thought what I was doing was entertainment.
I think it's a lot more than just music. I mean, they're selling ideas, thought, consciousness.
We weren't just trying to make music. We were trying to be monsters.
We were attracted to all the normal things like
guns,
Dadaist,
knives, and
anti-bourgeois, and
drugs, and
Rambo, or
hookers, and
drag queens, and you know, all kinds of excess.
Yeah, it was definitely a very amoral mindset that's all of the members of Teenage Jesus and probably a few other of our No Wave peers were in.
People started to create with music because they had no other choice. It was a sickness within themselves that they had to try to purge through music. Again, it wasn't about, oh, music, I want to do it because I can. No, it was music, I have to do it or I'm going to go insane and hurt myself or somebody else.
It wasn't entirely fostered by drugs either. It was a certain outlook on life that led us to that. We didn't feel like we fit in with anything. We were the ultimate high school rejects.
It was desperate, dirty, impoverished times. There was nothing pleasant about the circumstance other than the fact that for some freak reason, all these freaks had come to New York in order to try to purge themselves of their specific sickness in a very sick and impoverished environment. And it worked.
It was one of those periods, I mean, certain cities in certain, you know, Paris in the 20s or whatever, you know, I mean, New York in the late 70s, early 80s was one of those periods where something happened, and all of the arts were kind of involved in this big reductionist thing right then. I mean, you know, painting got really simple, and the same thing happened in literature and in film, and the No Wave was really the flowering of that in terms of music. I mean, everything was stripped down to its essence.
It's funny because when I first started getting into punk rock in the mid-70s, I had friends who were just like, you know, that's bunk, you know, that stuff is crap. And then I had a couple of friends who were into it. And when I moved here in '77 and these bands started developing, like Contortions and DNA and Mars and Teenage Jesus and Static and Theoretical Girls and what have you, the people who had been really sort of going to see all these punk rock bands with me just fell off. They're like, whoa, that's not even like, I mean, there's nothing going on there. That's like really, that's bad music. That's and it was funny because it had gone to like a whole other subterranean level of radicalism in the scene, and which I completely embraced because I thought it was much more sort of authentic to the community, that kind of music, than this music this other music that was importing ideas from tradition. This was like real music of this community of New York. So I thought it was the most expressive music for downtown New York was No Wave music.
It was very remarkable. It was a scene that flowered in the course of about, I don't know, 8 to 18 months or something like that, and then died just as quickly. And it was just so overwhelming that you didn't need more of it almost. And that was the object wasn't for it to go on forever. The object was for it to make its statement and be done.
It's funny, after that whole scene kind of like stopped, and you met people like Blixa Bargold from Einstürzende Neubauten, where it was very important for him. Both I and Yoshimi from the Boredoms, extremely important to them as a vocabulary. So it was this thing that really sort of did translate to a lot of people as this really sort of exciting, unorthodox application of rock and roll.
I started to get really kind of sick of the LA scene because it was so generic and kind of fashion conscious at the time. And I was hearing bands in New York like Suicide, especially. Of course, the Ramones and Television, whom I liked a lot. All that stuff was kind of ebbing. And then I picked up, I think it was the Theoretical Girls single by Glenn Branca and the No New York album.
No New York, when that came out, that was very exciting.
And just instantly related to that stuff because it wasn't using the kind of rock cliches.
In a way that bands like the Sex Pistols and the Ramones, etc., weren't really destroying rock and roll, even though the Sex Pistols were saying they wanted to. They were still playing Chuck Berry chords coming out of Johnny Thunders. Lydia's whole thing was like, I don't play anything. I don't play chords. I get a slide guitar and I just like slam it on my guitar and made this really beautiful, expressive music.
Energy alone was enough, and in many cases it really was. I mean, it didn't matter if you didn't have many chops or didn't know how to play more than one chord or one note. It wasn't about any of that, It was about energy and emotion.
But at the time, I remember thinking it was just like, God, this these bands are really fucked up, and it's kind of cool. And then it was over, and then like
behind that came us, Sonic Youth, and Swans, and a bunch of other sort of people at that point.
Thanks, here's another new one. Too new. Wow, where'd Steve go?
Thurston and Kim and I all moved to New York at the very end of the 70s, like 78, 79, when the whole punk thing was starting to explode here. We all came at that time from various places, Kim and I from art schools, and Thurston from having studied literature in college, and just kind of came to New York to do music and be part of the scene here.
And that was the influx of people coming to New York because this is where the energy was with punk rock. But they were artists. People coming out of art schools responding to sort of like the high art of punk rock. So I met Kim and Lee on that circuit, and we started playing together as a trio. And just started playing the way we wanted to play, which was taking ideas from the music that we had been completely immersed in, which was just below 14th Street.
I think I saw a Taxi Driver, and that sort of depicted New York of the era, and that kind of appealed to me. And there was the art stuff going on here that I was interested in. So I just packed up, left LA, got here, was, I don't know, probably $200 or $300, and just figured out how to survive. I literally had cardboard in my shoes for the first couple winters. And I, had no money whatsoever. I would do construction work and things if I could find it. One colorful moment was I was tearing down a ceiling, and there was about a pile about a foot high of dried rat shit on the ceiling, and when I pulled down the ceiling, it all came down on me. It just seemed like the whole aspect that I was interested in New York kind of just wasn't there anymore, and it had become something else pretty quickly. And then I got fed up with that and started Swans.
I first came to New York in, well, Halloween 1983 for a couple of shows at Danceteria. The project was called The Immaculate Consumptive, which was myself, Lydia Lunch, Nick Cave, and Mark Almond. And I loved New York. When after having lived in London for 5 years, it was everything that London wasn't. It was compact, it was 24 hours, it sucked me in.
I think rhythmically we're much more intense, certainly, than most of the no-wave stuff, and much heavier and louder, certainly.
I think when we all started, there wasn't even, you loved that music, but you didn't really, you just were working in a vacuum, in a sense. Nobody wanted to do music like you could hear from some other band.
Certainly when I started out, I had notions of sweeping away a lot of stuff, and shaking up, the way that things were done.
And it wasn't about anything to do with technique.
Use anything that makes a noise.
It was your approach and your application of your ideas.
Mainly, I just wanted an excuse to rage.
Having something to say and saying it in a very distilled kind of means.
I didn't want to teach anybody anything, never have. I possessed no wisdom whatsoever. I just wanted to do what I wanted to do. And if people liked it, fine. If not, they could go away. Which they often did in the early days, I'll tell you that.
There was nothing to do but just sort of follow your dream and follow the music you wanted to make. And you weren't worried about media interest or record company interest or any of that kind of stuff, because there wasn't any on any level. If some little 10-page black and white Xerox fanzine wrote a half a column article about you, that was the most you could hope for.
To get a little mention in the Village Voice or the then Soho News was a huge deal. It was very unlikely at all.
And now you've got these bands that are getting into Rolling Stone 5 months after they get together, and it's a whole different thing.
I think has really made a big difference in how much attention we've gotten, right away, was just that from the beginning, our first show, we've always had this attitude that we're the biggest band in the world. We duped a lot of people, but then inevitably we duped ourselves, and now here we are, so.
In this mess we're stuck in.
Come on, dance! Insurrection! You can't take the tricks of blue jeans, but it's so drop down.
We met conveniently.
Angus and I were standing on the sidewalk one day looking at a billboard of all these rent prices and stuff, and we got to talking about how ridiculous the rent prices were. I just said, man, I just want to play music, you know. And he's like, oh yeah, I play music too.
At the same time that they met that way, Ron, just out of the blue, he's like, it's hot out, you want like a snow cone? I'm like, yeah, I'd really like one. And I dropped it.
It melted. So. And that's how we got the name, because it melted in the shape of Liars. It was all meant to be.
It never seems to work, the story.
No, it doesn't.
Never seems to work.
Check. People call us ARE, people call us the Weapons, ARE Weapons, you know,
it's just a name.
It's brand naming yourself, you know.
A stands for always, the R stands for reckon, and the E stands for everything. The thing actually came to Brain in a dream. He had a dream that he was a private eye named ARE Weapons.
ARE Weapons? Cool name. Yeah, we just like kicking ass, you know, we've been kicking ass, you know, under this name for 3 years. People love us, think we're fucking geniuses, think we're really cute. You keep doing it, and then people hate it, and you're like, oh, you do it even more.
Someone came up to me and said, you know, the older you will get, the more perverted you will get. I'd like to see you try it. You gotta go about it. One touch, be a bad man. Even not to slide. Or be a good time down there. Give it a try.
People think like, you know, we sound like a band from Ukraine, but like we sound like a band from New York. This is not a Ukrainian nationalistic band. It does not express a spirit of all Ukrainian culture. It expresses spirit of us immigrants who traveled the whole world already. And from everything we heard, we took what we like about music to make a new music. That is a music of Gogol Bordello and only.
1, 2, 3, and...
Across the street there's a metal stamping factory, and the rhythms and sounds that they make are truly fucking phenomenal. It's fucking just amazing, groovy as shit. Those are the kind of rhythms that I enjoy. It's almost as if New York City is the script and we interpret that. And it's directly related to this electrifying, ruthless, merciless city that we live in.
how big our audience is for what we do, because it is pretty out there.
I think we just did so many tours where it was obvious that people really didn't know what to make of it. And I think that sounds really romantic to people at first, like, people fucking hated it, the whole room hated it, that's so cool. Mm-hmm. And it's really cool in theory, but then you get a string of nights like that, and it's sometimes hard to remind yourself how cool it is.
There's a common thread which might have to do with our approach to making music. We're drawing from their way of making music, which was sort of more as art.
It wasn't anything it was more come on into this whole thing instead of we do this thing and you appreciate it from there.
What's really appealing about what was happening back then, in the late 70s, early 80s, is how small, from how small of a place it started. There's no glam or glitz or illusion about it.
That 5-year period where things seem to be quite pure and the intentions seem to be unique.
It was the crazy, fucked up last side of American existential rage.
Hope for people that didn't want to do things the way that they felt the rest of the world was doing them.
It was just kind of listen, man, this country's getting exhausted.
And they created something that had still a whispering breath left in this dead, rotting corpse.
And they just play the right kind of rock and roll. Nothing beats the Swans, or really early Sonic Youth too.
That's the one link between the past and now is Sonic Youth.
Sonic Youth,
they influenced everything.
To really blow my mind was the concert of Sonic Youth that happened in Kiev in 1988. It was so fucking loud. My bones were in pain, and I was standing there with my ears plugged like this. I was I definitely have to go where this music is coming from.
The legacy of the New York music scene, I think, just the fucking legacy of New York. It's a fucking glamorous place to live. That's why fucking everybody's here, It's we're fucking 25, we're in New York, where it's fucking fashion parties and fucking cocaine and, bagging pussy and all that shit. It's and that's the beauty about New York now, and there's enough weirdos in New York to support, the network, to support us.
It's a city where there's actually an audience for things like what we're doing.
I figured, I'm going to go to New York City. It's going to be this gloom and doom capital. I'm going to stick out like the farm boy from Nebraska. But, I felt a lot more at home here than actually I did at home.
Only in New York can you be that much of a weirdo and still be really fucking
feel like you're hot shit.
And you can be a couple of fucking sort of nerdy little dudes from Brooklyn.
We are from Brooklyn.
We all live in Brooklyn.
And the next thing you know, you fucking get groupies sucking your dick, and you're making them fucking $1 million a year. It's it's an American success story, for weirdos.
I met Karen through a mutual friend, I think at the Mars Bar, and didn't really think anything of it, but I guess we kept running into each other and somehow started making music together.
I'll tell you the honest truth, because we really never talk about it. The honest truth. What happened was that I met Nick through my friend Helen. We dated for about a week and a half. I was 21 maybe at the time or something like that. I'm 23 now. And New York was sexy, Nick was sexy at the time. But it didn't work out. It worked out horribly as far as that goes. So the only way we could save our relationship really was working with music. I had been doing singer-songwriting stuff, and Nick was the only person I've ever met who could work on that stuff with me. We're thinking, well, if we can do this, then you know, then we could really, you know, fuck shit up in like, you know, like a fuck rock band, you know. And so we hyped like this fuck rock band up like for like weeks, you know, like coming up with a name, coming up with like a logo. We were just like really into that, and then yeah, and then we actually got together to make some songs. Brian came in as like our savior, basically. Like before we had the show in Mercury Lounge, I called him up, and yeah, he's been our savior, you know. And then yeah, were born, you know.
It was just like for fun, for kicks. I don't think there was ever really like a serious notion of taking it outside of New York.
Yeah,
you know?
There never was. Yeah.
Ever. Not until like last year, probably, when all this stuff started to happen.
We want our EP to like be like an album, like something that people would listen to before, you know, as they're getting ready to go out or something, you know, like that's like, you know, our highest sort of goal as far as that goes. You ready?
I've been working on a thing for inspiration. I've been string on the tracks of abandoned train station.
And then all of a sudden getting phone calls from like weird record people in LA and like managers in Times Square asking, so what's up with the band? It totally took me by surprise.
Despite all the other hype and all like kind of like the big bad world that's come in on us, you know, it's like, well, you know, okay, that's all happening, but maybe like, you know, there's gonna be, you know, I'm gonna reach like Karen when she was like 15 years old or something, you know. It's like really innocent, like, you know. I think that's like what will really keep us going, you know, is like when we really start like breaking through to like those kids and stuff, you know, because that's like, you know, who we're really playing to is like ourselves like 10 years ago maybe, you know.
You know what was really cool? It wasn't in New York, it was in Denmark.
Oh, yeah.
But Karen led a crowd of like 4,000 kids in a yeah chant.
Yeah, that was a festival at Roskilde. We went on at 2:30 in the morning, like 23 hours of sunlight. The sun went down right when we went on stage, and the sun started coming up right when we got off stage. It was like perfect timing. Yeah.
Timing was right. And I guess we have the Strokes to thank for making it possible for record companies to focus their greed on New York for long enough to actually sign a few bands.
When we went to England last year, people were asking us all this stuff about the Strokes. Like, well, they're this brand new New York band. I mean, they're so amazing. And none of us had ever heard of them. We'd never heard them playing a show in New York.
I heard the Strokes last night for the first time.
And then even after we came back to New York, we started hearing about them, but nobody here knew about them. It was really weird.
I wasn't very impressed by their record, but I knew they must be a good band because they're such a big deal.
So the media sort of blew it up out of proportion even before the kid on the street heard about it, you know, and it's interesting to when that happens. I mean, more people know about the current bands in the New York scene by name than have ever seen them play or heard their records, and you know, hopefully that will change and people will see all these bands and see how good they are for the most part.
I'll tell you what I think about the scene. This is what I think about the scene.
I define the scene as like more based on like collecting ideas.
It's a scene of a lot of babies, you know, experimenting.
It's kind of like a learning process, you know.
Just like trying to figure out for themselves, you know, like, you know, what amuses them or what, you know, makes their clock tick.
Crossing genres and like mixing shit up.
It's just kids, like, you know, I feel like it's a bunch of babies, you know, including us, you know.
It's not about like locking stuff up and saying this is what we're about. It's like saying maybe we don't know what we're about, but we want you to help us figure it out.
That's the best thing about whatever's going on now in New York is that there are tons of great bands, but none of them are trying to sound like each other. And there's no certain genre or sound that is more appreciated or more accepted. It's more like just your sort of approach to being sort of honest about making something creative is what people really admire. And I just think that that you learn in that way from the scene or whatever, you know, because there are these bands playing and they're pushing the limits in all these different directions.
I don't know, do you think there's people trying to be innovative and break new ground, or trying to be in fashion magazines and go to fabulous parties? I think there's a lot of the latter going on.
The New York scene has become, I don't know, more like the LA scene used to be. I mean, people coming here to make a name for themselves, you know. I mean, this is a media center and all of that crap.
Media conscious.
Career opportunities. The idea of success.
$1 million publishing deal.
The biggest band in the world.
And I mean, as long as that's what you're thinking about, well, I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, you're in trouble.
Bunch of post-punk pop mama's boys that they are. That is the biggest problem with music now, is how desperate they are to be liked, to be loved, to find an audience, to be in the next fucking car commercial.
This particular scene that's happening now is very posy and very fashion and very styled and stuff.
It's very manufactured. I mean, they probably have stylists working for them, you know. It's so cynically put together to evoke New York danger rock, you know. It's like barf, man.
It's just so la-di-da, happy-go-lucky, spoiled little brats from the suburbs coming in to start a band because they can, which tells me absolutely nothing, shows me nothing new, is not visionary, and is by its very nature and attitude redundant.
There's always been a fucking like Strokes fucking yeah band fucking kicking around. Like there hasn't been fucking like, you know, like weedy fucking blues punk bands kicking around since before the fucking Cramps in New York. I mean, what the fuck, you know?
How many fucking miserable noise bands didn't make it before Black Dice did, you know? You know, I haven't even heard the Lyres, but it's like, yeah, they got a bona fide ESG sample.
I really like the ESG.
It's like, great, I got a fucking bona fide boner for your, you know, ESG sample. It's like, ESG was fucking cool when I was in fucking 11th grade in college for me, and it was fucking cool 10 years ago for somebody else getting into it late, and it was cool 20 years ago for somebody, you know, fucking doing coke at the Latin Quarter. Yeah, fucking bone up, but it's like, then just try to put a twist on it and have that twist not be like, you know, how fucking tight your jeans are, or like how much you play ESG music but look like you're in the Kinks.
I think it's very sad that in referencing something that happened 25 years ago, it's not as if there's a revival of the intellectual concepts or the visions or the diversity or the extremity of that music, but it's a homogenization, it's a gentrification, and it's a softening.
I'll like listen to, say, the Black Dice album, and I'll go, okay, I like that, and I'll listen to it again, and I've listened to it a few times, but then I do find that I get more excited about some old Lalo Schifrin album that I find, you know, some old soundtrack, because that speaks to me a lot more, because I don't know if I'm going to be listening to that Black Dice album next year.
It just really doesn't last. This music just really doesn't.
It just feels soft. It feels mushy. There's nothing important that they're doing.
I read somewhere recently that every generation thinks that they invented nostalgia and sex.
The retro thing.
You know, like I feel like all the bands that you're covering in this documentary, we're also chained to like a lot of the same stuff.
The whole old New York thing that we get compared to a lot.
You guys sound like Suicide. This is the same tradition as fucking the first Sonic Youth record.
I think everybody just sort of seems like they're into whatever they, whatever. And like certain bands, you could tell what kind of bands they're into.
I think a lot of times it's easy to tell when someone's interests are so focused on one thing.
When a band goes on stage, there's a lot that I see most of the time, which is just about finding some kind of gratification into emulating things that you've been a fan of.
I mean, I think we've played with a lot of bands that seemed like that.
I just happened to, find my pleasure somewhere else. This is a part of why I'm doing music, because I don't find some things in music that I'd like to find.
The best thing to do is imagine yourself in a house of mirrors, and you take a couple guns and you try to find yourself in there and shoot it all out.
We just try to never have the conversation where we're like, this sounds like such and such a band or whatever, because that just takes it just to the lowest level, like immediately. Like I feel like if that comment's brought up, then it just brings us so far down.
It's very seldom that we talk about music, really. I mean, I think most of the ideas that come into play when we're playing with each other are based off of daily experiences or things we see or non-musical things that we hear.
We'd literally have like drawings and we'll talk about a part, like I have this sound in my head that looks like sparks flying or whatever it is, and we'd work off of that.
One thing that's sort of nice about trying different sorts of instrumentation or coming up with devices that make sounds is that you're looking at the sounds also as this raw thing that doesn't have like a history to it. If we were doing or trying to play the same type of music we're playing now with bass, guitar, drums, and like a lead singer, I mean that format has like a lot of history to it, and I think that in some ways that's like confining.
The commodification and homogenization of especially bass, guitar, and drums, is the downfall of music. Where's the fucking tubas? Pick up a tuba, a trombone, anything but a bass, guitar, or drums.
I come from a very musical family, which actually has gypsy blood, and I kind of grew up in an atmosphere of kind of a raw, brutal countryside music. It's like, you know, I've heard the Stooges, like my dad had the Stooges on the fucking this old tapes like this. That was powerful. But I was like, listen, this music is kind of like that too. It's kind of just as oblivious, and since then I started getting interested in combining these two. This is a risky kind of music, you know, and the whole punk rock, when it started, it was a trial and error. It was a really kind of a clicking on one leg style that it was just so fucked up that you didn't know if it was cool or not. You know, there was no formed opinion about it, and that's the great exciting atmosphere for art. Is making new entities of music, and the possibilities are fucking endless, man. There's no time for fucking revivals of some shit, you know. There's only fucking time to move forward, man. There's no time for softcore, man. You know, gotta get fucking hardcore, man.
If you walk down most of Manhattan, like lower Manhattan, it seems like it's not even the year 2002. Like the fashion's a lot different, and I feel like a lot of people's tastes are really looking back right now.
It seems to me that a lot of the people who are like looking back at how things were in 1982 are looking back at 1982 and seeing what like the secretaries for investment bankers looked like when they went out on a Friday night in 1982. Basically, majority of stuff now is already made by the formula of what's cool, which is what they saw in the magazines. You know, it's like it's more almost about the haircut and the basic sound. Stuff that's so appealing and is being repackaged from the 80s wasn't, you know, and is being taken and maybe represented, wasn't interesting in the 80s at all. It should take a lot more artistic courage than have such a ready-made formulas for what's gonna be cool and everybody's gonna think what's cool. Fuck that kind of cool, man.
I think that when you adopt nostalgia as the basis for something of which you're going to create from, that just, to me, indicates an intellectual bankruptcy.
How can anything strong and progressive really be so based on 80s revival? I mean, it's a good gimmick for one party, but I don't think it's a slogan for cultural revolution.
Even if they do like the things now, I feel like they're totally aware of it being sort of like something that's very retro.
The irony and like the sense of humor we have about it But really, that goes back to something really, pure and innocent too.
Irony. What is irony? Is emotional removal from what is going on. So everything you're saying is basically not what you mean.
Like the world that people are growing up in these days, which is like one really like that doesn't seem to have like I don't know, like the belief system or like anything to really believe in. This new way of thinking that's like sort of postmodern, and like deconstructing everything till like nothing means anything anymore. Like
everything that comes out now seems to be done on this premise in this country. Everything. To me, it's like a call for like a new form of a nihilism, really, like a positive nihilism, which is. But I guess nihilism is always actually pretty positive, if you really think about it.
Sometimes I do feel sorry for kids. We didn't have a whole industry selling us back to ourselves.
Yeah, if you look at the rock magazines, the popular rock magazines and things like that, it's hard to tell the difference between the rock performer and the advertisement selling Nikes next to him.
I'll be surprised if the Yeah aren't on a AT&T commercial before their first album comes out.
They both look like the same kind of people, and they're both basically representing the same thing, and they're probably both owned by the same conglomerate.
I read this interview with Debbie Harry. She said like how different it is now, like because she had to go do this thing for this party for the Strokes, and it was like being promoted by Levi's, and so she was like, it's not the same.
I think it's just so deeply controlled,
What media, especially television, proved to us is like you can make people want anything.
Corporate capitalism has obviously succeeded in completely infiltrating people's minds to the extent where their desires and their view of themselves is based on the persistent kind of advertising.
People almost can't tell what to rebel against because they're so fucking confused.
I think the thing is really different, and the ways out of that stifling situation are bound to be different also.
Hopefully, it'll still be going on, hopefully it won't fade away and become a thing of the past, and the people who are a part of it now will still be doing music and not be looked at as, oh, you were from, 2002, when there was that scene going on out there, because, the hype will fade away, but hopefully, the music and the good bands won't. So that's ideally how I'd like to be remembered, as in not remembered, because it'll continue happening.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the whole thing, dies out within a year. There are a few bands I expect to keep putting out good music.
I don't know if we're gonna be around, man. I don't know. We'll see.
The Yahoos.
I don't know. We have everything under control, complete control right now. Everything's fine and under control.
We'll all go downhill soon enough.
I think the next thing will be like a yes wave.
Jazz has become an interpretive music. The great players now are really interpreters of what has happened. The way classical music became interpretive music for so many years. It's interpreting Coltrane now. It's interpreting Duke. And like I was saying, it's interpreting rock and roll. It's interpreting the 80s, interpreting the 70s, interpreting Chuck Berry. So rock and roll is now entering into an interpretive form.
I think one of the strongest things about New York and its place in the history of music is New York's never been a place that suffered nostalgia gladly.
When nothing really new comes about in an art form for like 10, 15, 20 years, basically, And it's been around for quite a while, and it already had its avant-garde, and rocket was punk. It's really avant-garde and no wave, new wave. And then you kind of know if it's not coming, you know, for a while.
It's time for something new. What they do is totally cool. I don't think they should change. I think they should do what they do. But that doesn't mean that there aren't new ideas, and I know there are new ideas. I want to hear them.
I remember when I moved to New York, my friend Mark Cunningham and I, he was in Mars. Before we started these bands, we were gonna start a magazine, and we had ferreted out Burroughs, and we kind of pressed him like, well, what's next? What's the future? You know, he's like, dude, don't ask me. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of an impossible I don't know.
Trap set up for you in every corner of this town, and so you learn the only way to go is underground. When there's a trap set up for you in every corner of your room, and so you learn the only way to go is through the roof. Through the roof, underground. Through the roof, underground. Crossing border after border, we realize the difference is none. It's Underdog Zoo, and if you want it, you always have to make your own fun. And I say Upper Dog, leisurely sighing, the local cultures are dying and dying. The programmed robots are buying and buying, and oh, secluded freaks, they are still trying.